Young lad, it is time you learned of the Azorius Senate. Also known as the High Judges, the Azorius Senate is Ravnica's ostensible government. The guild considers itself to be the mediator and controller of all other guilds' activities, even though most of its countless decrees are largely ignored. That's not to say the Azorius Senate is impotent, however. Its legitimacy and reach wax and wane over time depending on economics, cultural trends, and the reaction to other guilds' overreach. At its best, the ultra-hierarchical Azorius Senate is just, far-sighted, and impartial. At its worst, the guild is cold, stultifying, and bureaucratic. On the Azorius guild structure, the Sphinx Isperia is the current guild master of Azorius. The process of convincing Isperia to lead the guild took years, as Sphinxes are aloof beings who value solitude above all. As crimes and chaos on Ravnica increased in the absence of the guild pact, however, and as its denizens more vocally demanded laws and their enforcements, Isperia decided her services were needed enough to trump her own preferences. On the three columns, the trias politica structure of the Azorius Senate has existed nearly since the beginning of the guild, but had been theoretical and unimportant for millennia. With the dissolution of the guild pact and the rebuilding of Prague, the Azorius revivified the concept, and it has become deeply meaningful and reflective of the guild structure and hierarchy. The Sova column, comparable to a judiciary branch, this column adjudicates, arbitrates, mediates, and studies the effect of Azorius law. The Gelen column, this is the legislative part of the guild, the actual makers of law, including assessing the need for new laws and formulating their language. The Liev column, putting laws into practice as well as enforcement of them, is the domain of the Liev column. The guild's users of magic tend to fall into three functions: establish, maintain, refine, or alternatively, build, defend, improve. Although these functions might seem to map cleanly to the columns Gelen, Liev, and Sova, all three functions find expressions in all three columns. On the political stances and attitudes towards other guilds, the Azorius has the following to say. The Isid, a valuable asset. The Isid League is like a secondary Liev column carrying out enactments in ways the Senate cannot. They also probe the limitations of our laws in interesting non-malicious ways. The Rakdos. These poor souls are beyond help. The best we can do is prevent their overreach and to help their victims. The day will come when society at large find them to be superfluous. The Golgari. We understand the swarm least of all the guilds. They serve an indispensable purpose and yet share not one iota of ideology with us. Our policy is one of cautious detente, but we would like to understand better the rules with which they self-govern. Finally, the Selesnya. The conclave generally obeys the law and keeps to itself. In time, it could become a threat, but for now, it is harmless, if not an ally. Let's take a look at the legislative spells that go into the Aura Servant's deck. Welcome back. We've finally gotten to the last of the 5 DLC decks, and this deck is... it can be very frustrating to play, but it can be fun at times because you get these situations where you're just entirely overpowering your opponent and everything is just going for you. You have those creatures that are enchanted to the from top to toe, and at the same in the same way, it's very, very cheap. It's an amazing deck when it works, and at the same time it's really, really cheap. But at the same time, it also has some things for it that hinders that it might work every time, just like the Aura Mancer deck of 2012, Magic 2012. But let's take a look at it. Okay, so it should come as no surprise that I'm not running the Evolving Wilds. If you've seen any of my other DLC videos, that's just how I roll, for better or for worse. My mana curve is a little bit wonky. I only have one drop, and from then on I have a lot of 2 drops, a bunch of 3 drops, some 4 drops, a lot of 5 drops, almost too many, but there's just too many good cards, and a few very expensive cards. But the mana balance is 10 to 10, so that's pretty good. Okay, so what am I actually running? I'm not running this guy because it's a flash card, sure. It's not very significant though. It's a nice combat trick, but the way that I run this deck is that I need to make some very, very powerful creatures and swing in, and the only way that I need to be tricksy is with the board presence. So it doesn't fit the theme of my deck. It's not good enough. It's not fast. It is fast enough, but it doesn't really do that much work. Kor Spiritdancer. I think I run 2 of them. I think 4 is a bit much. I do believe you can run up to 4. Yeah, exactly. So 4 is a bit much, but it's a great card, especially because it draws you cards. But when there's a strong competitor to this card, and that's the Invisible Stalker, which I'm running 4 of because I want to draw them. I want them in my opening hand basically every time I play the game or play a match with the deck, and that is because it has hexproof. It's a 1/1 and it doesn't have all these fancy abilities that Kor Spiritdancer has, but Kor Spiritdancer can be removed pretty easily. It can be removed by direct damage if you get rid of it early, or it can be removed with the destruction spells. Or for that matter, exile spells. So it's much more vulnerable. So that's why I'm only running 2 of them. I want those cheap creatures, but I don't want to have too many of them, because if you have 2 or 3 of them and you can't enchant all of them, then of course they draw you extra cards, but they don't do much else. And at that point, you really want creatures that can work for you, either do damage or take damage or block essentially, because you better believe that your opponent is going to do a lot to try to do away with or to chip away at your life total. So yeah, Academy researchers, it's a nice trick. You put it into play and you attach an aura to it, but I really want my auras attached to other creatures, so I don't find that this card is very significant. Yeah, it doesn't really help me out a lot, and sometimes you end up sitting with a hand where you have what's it called? You have a hand where you have the Pacifism and Narcolepsy or something like that, and Academy researchers is not going to be much help to you in that situation. So I took it out. Doesn't really need it. I don't really need it. Auramancer. It's also a nice trick, but I found myself not to rely too much on what's in my graveyard. I would much rather focus on what I'm drawing, or the creatures or spells that would draw me enchantments. So yeah, I haven't had much need for it. Aven Mimeomancer, I'm running 1 of them. It's a really, really nice ability it has. It's very, very cool. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a feather counter on target creature. If you do, that creature is a 3/1 and has flying for as long as it has a feather count on it. That's very nice. You can turn your Invisible Stalkers into 3/1s with flying, which means that they can block if need be and do 3 points of damage to an attacking creature, or they can just swing in there for 3 instead of 1, and when you enchant them, that's 3/1 as a base, which means that all the enchantment buffs come on top of that. So I think it's a very, very strong, very powerful card. So yeah, I'm running 1 of them. I don't really need 2 of them. But 1 is very good, because for it to be really effective, you only need 1. If you have 2 of them, they don't really help each other out too much. So I don't need situations where I actually have 2 of them down. The good thing though would be that if your opponent is running big creatures, you can turn them into 3/1s with flying though. But still, If it's when you're running a deck and a build, well, I guess a deck without too much removal, it's a nice trick to have in your sleeve. Imperial Armor, I'm running one of them. I don't need two because I tend to empty my hand rather fast, and this card only has some traction to it when you have like a stacked hand. I guess Imperial Armor in conjunction with the Kor Spiritdancer drawing you a lot of cards would be pretty decent, but it's not the way I chose to run it. Flickerwisp is a nice trick. You can do a lot of interesting things with it, but it hasn't helped me out enough for me to consider giving it a space in the deck or a slot in the deck. Nomad Mythmaker. Put target aura card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control attached to a creature you control. That's pretty cool as well, but when you have like a lot of hexproof creatures, the chances that your enchantments don't seem to end up in the graveyard too much. So yeah, I think that's very circumstantial, and I want something that that helps me out most of the time. Ophidian Eye, Flash, enchant creature. Whenever an enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Also a nice trick in conjunction, or a nice enchantment in conjunction with the Imperial Armor. But yeah, I don't think that it's that important for me. Although I might be wrong. I think it does too little, is what I should say. Talon Trooper is too vanilla. It's a 2/3 for 3 cost with flying. Yeah, it's too vanilla. Don't need it. Don't need it. Aven Fleetwing is a flying hexproof. The hexproof deal is really appealing, but it's very, very expensive. I think too expensive. And when we come to the 4 cost and the 5 cost, I have better creatures that I want with better abilities. Indestructibility, I'm running 2 of them. It's a really good card. I don't need more than 2, I think. There are some effects in the deck. What's it called? It's called it's a big guy with the Exalted. Where are you, my friend? Here he is, the Sovereign of Lost Alara. I'm running both of them. Skipping ahead, sorry. But this guy, when I get him down, he draws me exactly the aura card that I need. And if I just need 1 Indestructibility, that would be enough for me. Ocular Halo, you can draw your card, your creature gains vigilance. I think it's a little too expensive. Like, I like the card drawing thing, especially if you can't attack with a certain creature. But I don't know. I think it's a little unimportant, unspectacular in that sense. Wall of Reverence is a nice life gaining card, but I have a few auras in there that'll gain me life, which has lifelink on them. So I don't need more than that. This is not a life gain deck. It just works, its stalling mechanics just works well with a little bit of life gain. Celestial Ancient, I think I run 1 of them, 1 or 2. I guess there's only 2 in the deck. Yeah, I run 1 of them. I think it's really, really good, very, very good. But it's only good once you actually get all of those things. And you should remember that for the Aura Servants, just like the Auramancer deck from 2012, for it to work, you need both lands, you need creatures, and you need enchantments. You don't need lands and creatures, or like a few lands and a lot of creatures like the Goblin deck or something like that. You need lands and plenty of them. You need creatures, a significant amount or certain kinds of creatures, and you need enchantments. So this card is going to be good for you when everything is working. It's not entirely situational, because there's a big chance that it is going to be working for you, but you don't need 2 of them. Although you would definitely, every time you have this creature down, you would definitely think that having a second one down would be amazing. But I think that it's too expensive, and it's too a little too situational without being amazingly situational for you to rely too much on creatures like that. Drake Umbra is way too expensive for me. A 5 cost enchant creature, totem armor. I would much rather have the Mammoth Umbra. Followed Footsteps, I think I run one of them. 2 of them? Okay, I run 2 of them. I don't really need 3 of them. That's too much. Because a lot of the time you don't need a lot of your creatures, and you probably don't need a lot of your opponent's creatures, although it might be helpful to you. But there are these times that it will certainly help you out. The thing about this deck is that it focuses much like the Exalted deck, Exalted Darkness. It focuses on singular creatures, the ones that you choose to enchant. And sometimes it focuses on the synergy of different abilities, creature abilities, from different creatures. But to copy creatures, you would need some kind of either synergetic effect that worked across the board for you, or you would need really, really good attackers. So yeah, I don't think I have a need for 3 of them. Fool's Demise, it's a little unspectacular. It's very expensive. I don't know. I don't want to have another step between me and doing some kind of damage to my opponent or controlling the game. I mean, it's cool that you get your card back, but that's 5 mana that you have to pay for. Like, I would much rather focus on, like, if I lose a creature, then focus on the future instead of just trying to hold on to a certain creature in my arsenal. Yeah, Mammoth Umbra. I only run 1 of them. It's probably because it's a little expensive, and because there's something just as good or even better. There's the here we go. I think yeah, Daybreak Coronet. It's a 2 cost. Well, let's talk about that later. But it's much better. Basically, if you already have an enchantment down on a creature. Mind Control. I think I run 1 of them as well. Again, because I think the possibility of mind controlling or following putting following footsteps on what your opponent's creatures and so on is nice and all, but it's a little expensive, and you want your combination to be working. You don't want your opponent's combinations to be working for you, because that's not the theme of your deck, or of this build at least. The theme of this build is to do a little bit of control work, but most of the time you just want those singular, very, very powerful creatures that can take you all the way to the finish. Sigil of the Empty Throne is nice as well, but I think it goes a little outside of the theme of the deck. And the thing about it is that once you hit land drop 5 with the build that I've made, you pretty much have to consider some of the other things, expensive cards that I'm running, and this one is just gonna sit there and just make you think, I should drop it because I want those free 4/4 white angel tokens with flying, but that means that I have to drop the Sigil of the Empty Throne. That means I need to cast another enchantments, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, that might work out for you. That might be very, very good. But if they take the Sigil of the Empty Throne away, or if they just kill your angels, then it's yeah, I don't know. Like I think it's too clunky in a sense. It's a little bit slow. Even though I won't deny for a second that it's really, really powerful. But yeah, in this deck or in this build, I don't think so. 3 Dreams, a little expensive, and I have better ways of gaining or getting my enchantments or aura cards. So yeah, I think it's a little expensive. Totem Guide, Heartbeast or Heartebeast, much the same. I think it's too expensive. And you're probably gonna shake your head at me when I show you what I use to get those enchantments or auras. Aura Touch Mage is way too expensive for what it's worth. No. Sun Titan, I run one of them, and I think that's enough. Don't want too expensive cards in this deck, or too many too expensive cards in this deck. Iridescent Angel, 7 cost, flying protection from all colors. Sure, it's great when you get it down, but you can't enchant it, and it's only going to be a decent attacker and a great blocker. But yeah, I think you want to control the board a little bit earlier than that. So let's take a look at the cards that I actually do run. Again, Lifelink. For 2 reasons, because Lifelink stalls a little bit, and it can be a lifesaver, literally, in this deck, because you might get off to a bit of a slow start, and you want to get going. Like, you want those Invisible Stalkers to get in there and just even out the damage that your opponent does to you early, or smooth it out a little bit. But there's also a second reason, and that second reason is Daybreak Coronet, enchant creature with another aura attached to it. So that makes this card a little bit cheaper than it would be with if it depended on more expensive enchantments. But this card is absolutely insane. Once you attach it to a creature, it gets +3/+3, has First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. That makes it a beast. So I run both of them. It's probably the best enchantment in the whole deck. Definitely. Eel Umbra, I use it for its flash abilities, and not so much for its +1/+1, but it does work. It's a little tricksy, but it's mainly in there for the Daybreak Coronet, so I can get it down early. Invisible Stalker, yeah, like I said, I run all 4. It is the greatest creature in this deck because it's very cheap, it has hexproof, it's unblockable, and it's a fucking piece of shit. Seriously, not in the sense that it's bad, but in the sense that it's such a cheap card. It's very easy for this deck to make this creature just a beast, and there's very few ways to deal with it. There's a Wrath of God, I think, is in this deck, or maybe Day of Judgment. I think there's Pernicious Deed is a great way of getting rid of it because it's really cheap. But that's about it. There's not too many other cards. Well, there are the cards that make you sacrifice a creature and effects like that. But aside from that, it's just a monster. It's really, really difficult to do something about because it has hexproof and is unblockable. I think that's the cheapest combination there is. Yeah. Kor Spiritdancer, already talked about it. Have run 2 of them. It's a great ramp card, and it is in itself a very strong creature. If you're playing the burn deck, Born of Flames, or if you're playing Timmy decks like Ancient Wilds, which doesn't have a lot of removal, which aren't dependent on doing point-based damage, then this card is really, really good for you. It's certainly better than Invisible Stalker in the sense that you can make it huge just by attaching enchantments to it, and it will draw you more cards, which might also be aura spells that you can enchant your Kor Spiritdancer with. But aside from that, I would say the hexproof guy or the Invisible Stalker is better just because it has unblockable and hexproof. So yeah, there's that. Narcolepsy is a very interesting take on the pacifism mechanic. It doesn't say that your creature can't attack or can't block, but at the beginning of each upkeep, not just your opponent's, but at the beginning of each upkeep, it taps that creature down. So it essentially can't tap. Like if you put a pacifism on Master of the Wild Hunt, he's still able to use his little trick where he taps his wolves down and gets rid of some of your creatures. But if you put Narcolepsy on him, he keeps tapping, so he can't be used for anything. That's pretty awesome. other than producing wolves, that is. Pacifism, we all know that card. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. Yeah. So I run 2 Narcolepsies and 2 Pacifisms. I need some variety in my removal. Triclopean Sight. It has flash. When Triclopean Sight enters the battlefield, untap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. So it's actually both a defensive and an offensive card, which is pretty nice. Makes you able to use your creatures a little bit flexibly, a little bit more flexibly, or with a little bit of flexibility, I guess you could say. The fact that you can untap an enchanted creature, or untap a creature, and it becomes a little bigger, makes it so that you can surprise your opponent, kind of like with the Eel Umbra. But this is a little bit more surprising because you might have attacked with this creature first. So yeah, you can trick your opponent into doing, like, sacrificing his creatures in battle. That's pretty nice. Already talked about the Aven Mimeomancer. It's great, but not too many of them. Already talked about Empyrial Armor. It's decent, but not all the time. Oh, there's a second Flickerwisp. I guess I keep it in there just for the ability to do some tricks. But I think the thing is that if your opponent has one creature or one permanent that ties down your side, this guy can help you out at least for one turn. And I guess that's why I keep him in there. Because aside from that, just after it's down on the table, it's just a 3/1 with flying, which might be helpful, but it might not be all that helpful. Geist of St. Traft is really, really good. Very, very good. It's a 2/2 hexproof guy for and a 3 cost. And whenever he attacks, you might attack or put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Then you exile that token at the end of combat. It's very good. It's a very nice way of making your attacking side much more impressive. This guy is definitely good if you buff him up with some auras that'll make him bigger and more intimidating, because then you have 2 intimidating creatures swinging in every time. And it doesn't matter if you lose that angel creature, or if your opponent has to trade. That's even better, because you get another angel creature token every time you attack with this guy. So that's really good. Griffin Guide is great because it gives you a creature once your creature dies. So that's a little bit flexible, but it also is a it gives +2/+2 and flying to a creature. So that's why I use it. Instead of putting 2 Mammoth Umbras in there, which are 5 costs, I have 2 Griffin Guides in there, and a single Mammoth Umbra, because then it's not as painful to cast the Griffin Guide. You can cast it on turn 3. Hanne, the ship's navigator, or Hanne, ship's navigator, is a 3 cost 1/2, and you may return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. That's the thing. Like, this is the card that I use instead of the other cards to bring the enchantments back to my hand. I'm not entirely sure that I may end up having this card in my deck instead of the others. Like, instead of saying the others, let me just go find them so I can show you which cards they are. For example, there's this guy, the Nomad Mythmaker. I think he might actually be a better card to put in the deck. Let me just think about it. Yeah, because I'm not really running any artifacts. And there's the, where is she? Here, the Auramancer, which is like that. That's only once that you can do that. Let's do that. Yeah, sorry for changing it around while making the video, but I just I guess I was enthralled by the picture. I think it's a very beautiful lady on the picture, and I like all the gadgets she has roaming around. Let me just read it again. From the your graveyard to your hand. Nah, it's a little too like I like the Nomad Mythmaker better. Okay, Infiltrator's Magemark is really good because it makes your creature essentially unblockable unless your opponent has defenders. And not a lot of decks run defenders. For example, I can only come up with a few. For example, the Exalted Darkness deck runs defenders. Not entirely sure about. Maybe also the Crosswinds deck. I think, yeah, the Fog Banks are defenders as well, and I think there's also one of the green decks that run defenders. But aside from that, there's not a lot of decks that run defender, and that makes it so that this makes your creature essentially unblockable. And I used this to win a game, which I will show you in another video. But it's very, very powerful, very strong card. Again, Nomad Mythmaker. Yeah, it sounds as I try to make it sound as if this was premeditated, but actually it just came. I just realized this is much better than Hanne Ship's Navigator, and you see it doesn't mess with my mana, so that's pretty good. Pariah is great. You only get one of them, but in conjunction with the Indestructibility aura, this card just is insane because you won't be able to lose from direct damage. You would need Phage, the whatever her name is, that Lich creature that's in the black Obedient Dead deck to kill you or something like that. It's a great card, and it makes it so that it's really, really hard for your opponents to do anything about you unless they can destroy or exile the creature you put Pariah and Indestructibility on. But Pariah just works for you. Yeah, in most situations. Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth is such a great card. Once you get it down there, it makes your side cheaper, and it makes it so that this deck is a little bit like the Mindstorms deck because it's a little expensive, but this card makes it so that you get to ramp up a little bit, and it's the only ramp card you have, essentially the only mana ramp card you have in the deck. And it makes your what's even better is that it makes your opponent's life a little bit more miserable because like instead of waiting to get to land drop 4 or land drop 5, he has to wait another land drop until he can cast the spells he wants to. And it also makes it so that if he wants to cast 2 spells this turn, it costs him 2 extra mana instead of 1 extra mana. So that's really, really, really powerful. This guy is great as well. It helps with the defensive strategy. You don't even have to attack with him, or you don't even have to keep him back for him to work for you. If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of that damage. That's really powerful, especially against weenie decks like goblins or collective might or something like that. But it's powerful against all decks because as soon as they start swinging in with more creatures, like you prevent 1 damage for each of those creatures that gets to your face. So that's really powerful in my opinion. Indestructibility, enchanted permanent, is indestructible. I've already talked about it a little bit. It's very strong. It's a little expensive, but with this kind of ability, you shouldn't wonder about why it's so expensive. A very good card. Celestial Ancient is a card that I've already talked about already, but it's very, very great. You should definitely run at least 1 of them. Followed Footsteps, already talked about it, also a great card. So yeah, run 2 of them. And here's another beast, Godhead of Awe. It's a 5-drop 4/4 with flying, and other creatures, not just your opponents but also your own, are 1/1s. It helps out your Kor Spiritdancers, makes them into 1/1s instead of 0/2s, and it helps them out in the following way, that they could do 1 more damage with or without enchantments, so that's actually pretty good. It's not so good if you want to keep it back and it's unenchanted and you want to use it as a blocker against 1/1 creatures, but yeah, It's a great card, and it certainly what it does it is that when you cast the spell, suddenly the whole battlefield is changed. It really changes everything, and it should change it a little bit in your favor, if not a lot. So that's why it's like I think it's really important at least to consider this guy, because it's an amazing card. Mammoth Umbra, only run one of them. Already talked about it. It's a great card, but it's a little expensive. Don't need more than one. Mind Control, yeah, already talked about it as well. Winds of Rath, I need two of them because you don't have a lot of removal in this deck. But it's also a little tricky, because if it only said destroy all creatures that your opponent controls, it would be very easy. You just cast it whenever you can, whenever your opponent has scraped together enough creatures that you want to get rid of. But with this stipulation that you have to it destroys all creatures that aren't enchanted, that means that you can decide which creatures are enchanted by enchanting them, but it's very expensive. You have to. It's very preparatory. You have to prepare your creatures before you cast this card, or else your creatures are just gone. Just the same with your opponents. And there's also the fact that your opponent's creatures might be enchanted as well. You might be playing the Mirror, you might be playing Crosswinds, you might be playing some other deck that enchants their creatures. So you might be playing Sepulchral Strength running Rancor. So it's not bulletproof, but it's the best thing we have in this deck that might still preserve your side when you mass remove. Second to last, I run two of the Sovereigns of Lost Alara. It's a 6 cost, which is a little expensive, but when you consider the abilities, you would probably say that it is well worth the mana. It's a 4/5 with Exalted, and Exalted is interesting, especially because just like the Exalted Darkness deck, Aura Servants will rely on those singular, powerful, build-up and buffed creatures. So when you attack with that Invisible Stalker with a few enchantments on it, or just an Invisible Stalker, it gets Exalted, which makes it a 2/2, and you get to search your library for an Aura card and attach it to it, which is pretty amazing in my opinion. So this card is also a game changer, and I run two of them because if you have two of them down, you're just wrecking havoc. You're running through your deck so fast that you're exhausting it for the good enchantments. Very, very powerful card. Sun Titan is a really great card, but I thought it was too expensive to run two of them. It's a 6-drop, 6/6 with Vigilance, and once you get it down on the table, it's going to control, or most likely at least. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That means that it can return those Invisible Stalkers, those Kor Spiritdancers, those whatever you run that's not very expensive, like the Mimeomancer, and also all the enchantments that are 3 costs or less, for example the Daybreak Coronet or something like that. So that's a really powerful card, but you need to get to land drop 6, and the reason that I don't run two of them is that I can just copy it with the followed footsteps, and that I run these two guys, which are also 6 drops. So I feel that it clutters up your deck if you have too many expensive cards. Yeah, that is basically my deck, and like I've said before, I think this deck is a cheap piece of crap, not in the sense that it's bad, but in the sense that it can be really inefficient if things doesn't work for you. And keep in mind that with the DLC decks, there are problems with the mana, like the algorithm, there's problem with ramping and so on. Like you don't have too many things that will help you out in that sense. There are a few things that help you out in the card drawing department, and that may help you to get to those land drops. But yeah, it's it's really inefficient when it doesn't work, but you will see this card or this deck make some amazing comebacks, because once you get to land drop 4 or 5, you start whipping out those more powerful creatures and enchantments, or you might have dropped down a significant amount of really powerful auras on those singular creatures that will keep you stalemating your opponent, or keep you as a powerful threat to your opponent, maybe even taking over the game. So I think it feels like when you're playing against Aura Servants, it feels a little cheap because it's difficult to deal with. At the same time, it doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with your opponent's creatures. It doesn't have too many creatures that affect your opponent's board positioning or board state, or creatures even for a singular turn. Like, I'm looking at Flickerwisp. You have tricks like that, but you don't have too many target your opponent's creatures effects. Neither removal or other things. Like, you do have the Narcolepsy and you do have the Pacifisms, but aside from that, you don't have too many tricks or like, for example. And I think this is significant because it's very it's contrary to the Return to Ravnica guild mechanic that was released this month or last month. No, this month, I think, with the Azorius guild. It's called Detain, and it's basically like a lot of the Azorius cards this year has the guild mechanic Detain, I think that's what it's called, which is basically that you may target a creature and it's exiled for a turn, or I think maybe it's more, maybe it's permanently or until this creature is destroyed or away from the battlefield or something like that. But it's a guild mechanic that pretty much targets your opponent's side a lot, and yet in the deck that they chose to put in, with all the different combinations of different builds that you can create, they didn't add a lot of ways to detain or to deal with your opponent's creatures. I think that's almost ironic. So yeah, basically I think that's it. It can be a fun deck to play with, but I think it can also be very, very cheap, simply because when you have a deck that can build some amazingly powerful creatures and you only have very, very few means across the entire format to deal with, like just a simple 2-drop, then I think you've built something that is way too overpowered, way too cheap in a sense. But if you want to overlook that fact, and if you just want to play a great hand of Magic, then this deck is it can be fun to play with because it has some nice synergetic tricks that works for it. So yeah, I guess I don't have too much else to say about it. I just want to thank everybody for showing a great interest in the DLC or the Ravnica DLC deck introductions, and I hope I can do more videos like this for the next DLC, which will probably include the Gruul, the Orjov, the Boros, the Simic, which I'm looking forward to, and the Dimir, which I'm looking very much forward to because I'm a huge fan of the Dimir. For those of you who aren't familiar with these guilds, the Boros is white-red. I think best represented in March to War in Magic 2012. The Simic is perhaps somewhat represented in the Ancient Depth, I think it's called, from the 2012 format. It's blue-green. There's the Orjov, which is not really represented in the Exalted Darkness deck, but it is a white black deck, and I think it has the Haunt mechanic, which is pretty interesting, but I'm not sure if that's the old guild mechanic or the new one. Then there's the Gruul, which is green and red, and that is just like it's kind of a non-guild. It's a guild, or it's a collection or a conglomerate of non-affiliated wild people who doesn't like the bureaucracy and the control of the whole guild system that Ravnica is based on. And then finally there's the Dimir guild, which is represented by blue and black, and it is delvers in secrets and assassinations and brokers of information and stuff like that. It's very, very interesting. They have a lot of discard mechanics going for them, and draw cards and stuff like that. Really like that, and I'm looking forward to the guild mechanic that they want to put out for this deck, or that they want to introduce for this deck in the upcoming DLC, or not in the upcoming DLC, in the upcoming expansion, or one of the upcoming expansions if they do 2 different expansions. Anyways, thanks for watching. This video is running a little long because I'm blabbering away. I guess I could have stopped it before the 40-minute mark, but yeah, I hope you liked it. I am multeyemeteor, and this was the Azorius Guild Aura Servants. Laters!